Let's move to some other stories now. And Ghana's public debt stock could drop significantly by about 10% due to the rapid appreciation of the cedi based on a new projection by JoyNews research desk. Since the start of 2025, the Ghana cedi has strengthened by roughly 18% against the US dollar, making it the world's fastest appreciating currency since April 2025. According to Bloomberg, now analysis from JoyNews research team suggests this surge is set to ease a country's external debt burden, potentially reducing the current 726.7 billion Ghana cedis by as much as 10%. Now, let's get to understand what is informing this. And of course, lead researcher Isaac Kofi Jaminta joins me in the studio. So, Kofi, what really is going on?
Well, so interesting thing happening in the exchange rate market. And now we are talking about the rise of the cedi against the fall of the dollar. It used to be the other way around. We used to talk about the rise of the dollar and the fall of the cedi. But one thing is that the cedi is really gaining momentum and strength against the dollar. And yesterday, trading day began with $1 to 12 cedis, 37 pesos. And by the time we ended the trading day yesterday, $1 was selling at some 12 cedis, 10 pesos. Today we began with 12 cedis, 10 pesos, but we're not talking about 11 cedis, 85 pesos in terms of the exchange rate. So the big question is, what is really happening and how is this going to affect the debt position of the country? And that's what we've been analyzing. And if you do the math since the beginning of the year, the cedi has actually gone up against the dollar by some 17.6%. If we should add today's appreciation, we'll be hovering around 18%. But what is the story behind this 17.6% appreciation against the dollar? Now, you can see where the cedi has traveled in terms of its exchange to the dollar since the beginning of 2024. The story is different. What is happening is that we are returning to where we left off somewhere January of 2024. Just that this time around, that sort of appreciation wasn't sustainable.
Right.
But one thing that will catch your attention is a sharp decline we are seeing in the first 100 or more than 120 days or the first 4 months of the year, where even before we were preparing this graph, it was 12 cedis. 12.1, 12 cedis, 10%. But now we are talking about 11 cedis, 85 pesos.
I mean, the present is around, before midday, it was 11.9.
Exactly.
And then it's come to 11.8.
Absolutely. So,
which means, by the close of business today, it may even come down even further.
Absolutely. We are possibly projecting that it could end the day around somewhere 11 cedis, 80 pesos. But, I mean, the good news is that this could affect this mountain you see on the smart wall, which is Ghana's debt stock, which has been the bane on the country's economy. And you can see now we are owing about 726.7 billion Ghana cedis. And the reason why we are projecting that this figure could come down is because of the external component of the country's debt stock, which now is in excess of 400 billion, Ghana cedis. Why? Because the dollar component is a bit stable, right? So if you look at the debt in dollars from January of last year to December of last year, you can see a very uniform distribution or movement of the external debt. And now we're talking about some $28.3 billion. But you could see that the exchange rate dictates how much this will be valued in cedi terms. So when you see the cedi appreciating, it means that the dollar component of the external debt is going to come down. But when it is depreciating, then we are seeing that it's going to go up.
You're going to pay more.
Absolutely. And in 2022, I remember November when the former finance minister, Kenneth Oriata, was delivering that, was actually presenting the budget. He made mention that in December or in 2022, the entire year, we added some 93 billion cedis to our debt stock, not because we were borrowing, but because the country's currency was depreciating against the dollar.
Right.
The story is different, this time around, and we are projecting that this could, reduce the debt stock by some 74 billion Ghana cedis. Possibly, maybe at the end of the year, if we are able to keep this momentum, we could be chalking some other, target.
Because 10% is very significant.
Very, very significant. Looking at it in
almost a quarter of your debt.
Absolutely, almost a quarter of your debt. And in fact, if you look at the very short period of time, January to April, and the kind of appreciation the cedi has seen against the dollar, is able to afford you 10% reduction in your debt. If you're able to maintain this, and by the end of the year, if we are talking about some 11 cities or 10 cities, that could be a big, gain for the government. And in fact, looking at it on the side of interest payment, on the external side, this could reduce it significantly and could reduce government, burden. Now, looking into next year and next 2 years, 2026, 2027, what you will see is that the nature of our debt restructuring, these 2 years are the peak years where we, service most of our maturing debt and all of that. Most of them are in, external currencies or, the dollar. So it means that if the city is able to keep this momentum, we should expect, the debt servicing obligation to ease. So what we are projecting is that the current strength of the city could bring down Ghana's debt burden by some 10%.
And then the 10%, how much does it translate into in terms of physical cash?
That's about 74 billion.
74 billion cedis.
74 billion
off because of the appreciation of the cedi.
I mean, if you compare it to 2022, we're adding 93 billion. Now we're estimating that it could go down by some 74 billion cedis, within this space that we are analyzing.
All right, Kofi, thank you so much for coming through. Professor Lord Mensah of the University of Ghana Business School joins me via Zoom for more on this. Prof, good afternoon and good time to have you here.
Yeah, good afternoon, and good afternoon to our viewers out there. If you can hear me loud and clear.
I can hear you. And so this obviously is good news. Should we start jubilating or we should be cautious?
Well, it is a good news. If you look at the currency pattern over the past few, days, it sends a signal that, yes, the currency is gaining its value. But then the question that we normally ask in terms of when you look at financial economics is, the swings over the past few years, we may have to take our time before we start jubilating because we've had a currency that has depreciated over the years as a result of heating, economic dynamics. And now new administration, has come in that has given us, that kind of conserved, posture for which the currency is responding to it. So we may have to achieve the lowest minimum level and then look at way forward if government starts servicing its external debt, how the currency will appreciate. But then we're not going to see, that kind of, depreciation that we used to witness that at a point in time, it went to 16.5. But then we're looking at somewhere in between, the 16.5 and then the minimum level that the currency can get to. Hopefully, it should be able to get around, 10, Ghana cedis per the dollar. Then in that case, it will find its level, coming up again to a level where we may assume, full debt service and then also hold up with, our export and import obligations over, the year. So we shouldn't jubilate now, but then in the end, there's hope because we are now, looking at the dynamics where the optimum level needs to be obtained. And once that level is obtained, we should be able to to be decisive as to going forward how the dollar levels are going to be.
The APSA, a leading bank, says that per their projection, we will end the year with 14 cedis to the dollar. And some also suggested that because government is not spending so much, it is partly the reason why the cedi appears to be appreciating. Are these enough to say that it is the reason why we are where we are, or something more is being done to ensure the good run of the cedi?
Yeah, so from where I sit, I've heard people talk about, Trump's effect as far as, the trade war is concerned and all that. But we need to appreciate that the Trump's, trade war effect is quite, systemic, for which it affects almost every currency across, the globe. But then if you look at, the various currencies, each of them has, unique appreciation or unique depreciation against the dollar. That should tell you that countries like Ghana is doing something unique within the country, for which at the end of the day, it's affecting, the dollar in that manner, for which I can say the cedi is appreciating at that level. But then if you look at it carefully, you will be comfortable to say that, look, policy continuation, identifying the right policy to deal with going forward, and then also, looking at the new policy on the corridor, which is the gold board that was formed, clearly seemed to, hold up, the possible dollars that would have filtered into different spaces, not necessarily being accounted for in the bosom of the government. And as a result of that, that has, helped us to see this current appreciation that we are witnessing. So I can say that indeed Ghana is doing something unique, and that is why we are seeing this appreciation. If you go to our neighbors like Nigeria, even Taiwan, which is an industrial economy, they still have their currency depreciating against the dollar. So obviously it tells you that Ghana is doing something unique.
But can the gold board really be singled out for what is happening, knowing very well that the gold board has existed its existence has not even traveled more than 5 months, and yet...
Right, you're right. But then you see the expectations that goes with it. Let's not downplay the expectations, because we're talking about finance minister giving us a signal of about 2.5 billion being raked in as a result of the gold board policy, and that should tell you that going forward, if you're an investor who has to deal with the dollar, you have to be really careful, because Ghana has started accumulating enough dollars to show up the possible demands that will go with it. So I can say that confidently it is part of the reasons why we are witnessing the kind of appreciation that we see on the market now.
Prof, hold it for me. Let me bring you another view on this particular matter, and is the former technical advisor to the Vice President, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, a member of Parliament for Tananoff, Dr. Gideon Boakon, who joins us also via Zoom. Dr. Boakon, good to see you. Good afternoon. Welcome. And if you can kindly unmute for me.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, Doctor. So, according to Sami Jemfi, he says stringent monetary policy stance complemented by aggressive liquidity stabilization by the Bank of Ghana, and this was partly achieved through the strategic policy decision by the Bank of Ghana in March 2025 to increase the monetary policy rate by 100 basis points from 27% to 28%, and the open market operation of the Bank of Ghana. Second, fiscal consolidation by the Ministry of Finance and the restoration of investor confidence in the Ghanaian economy anchored on fiscal discipline and prudent public finance management. And thirdly, robust forest inflow and accelerated foreign reserve accumulation through the unprecedented gold purchases and exports by the PMMC Gold Board, as well as enhanced foreign exchange inflows from cocoa remittances, among others. For him, these are the three key areas that is responsible for what we are experiencing in our forests, the strength of the city, if you like.
Well, let me say that, yes, there are different factors that drive the movement in exchange rate. It will not be right for anybody to say that the movement we are seeing in the CD dollar and the other currencies, the rate is basically one thing, just one factor. At any point in time, depending on the circumstances, different factors may lead to the drive in the part of the performance of a particular currency. In this particular instance, you cannot rule out some of the issues you just mentioned, because we have seen how the US-China tariff or trade wars have affected the performance of the US dollar. And so technically, if you're into competition with someone and something happens to that person and his performance goes down, even if you don't put up any effort, you start to have competitive advantage over that person. So that is there. There are issues about market sentiments. There are issues about investor or market reactions and all of that. But just as you ended your statement, one of the key factors that undeniably is contributing to the greater performance of the city now is the issue of gold and the role that gold proceeds is playing in the performance of the currency. Give or take, whether market sentiments, investor confidence, import-driven or demand issues, the bottom line of the performance of any currency boils down to demand and supply. And so the rule of thumb is that at any point in time, managers of the national pairs will have to ensure that there is adequate supply of the foreign currency, which is dollars, such that if demand is low, you have a higher advantage, or at any time that demand increases, you have dollars to supply. If you look at the trajectory and the time series data and what has been put out so far by Gold Board and government, it points to one thing, that there have been significant injection of dollars into the Ghanaian economy, effective March, April, and May. It has been so significant to the extent that in April, the government of Ghana injected $590 million into the economy. This is about $500 million.
Right.
This has not been the practice. And in fact, if you look at the previous years, for instance, in 2024, because of the IMF program and the conditions that ought to be met, government of Ghana had to build the international reserves to cover about 3 months of imports. By December, government had been able to build more than 3 months of imports. And until government was able to do that, the government of Ghana was restricted as to how much dollars it can intervene into the market.
Because of the IMF program?
Initially, it was $80 million. And then later the IMF brought it down to $60 million. But because government was able to exceed the 3 months of import cover of reserves target by December, it means from January 2025 coming, the government of Ghana had the luxury to inject so much of dollars into the system. And that is basically, other factors are there. But if you want to look at the weightier issues, the main factor driving the performance of the city is that government has enough dollars through the gold that we have purchased, and government is injecting almost every cent of these volumes of dollars into the economy. As to whether that is a prudent thing to do, the government knows very well that yes, you can do short-term measures by way of steroids to inject dollars into the economy to contain the currency. But that is not something to do on a continuous basis if you really want to ensure long-term sustainability of the currency. But basically, that is what is happening.
But again, I remember over the weekend, your former boss, the vice president, asked the NDC to point out one single intervention they've done that is responsible for the strength of the city. They've given you 3. And does that satisfy you that indeed something really is being done and that what is happening is not by accident?
Well, I think, to be fair, even if the government took a decision not to do anything, the fact that you can even decide not to do anything is a decision by government. So I wouldn't say the government has not done anything. But basically what government has decided to do is that on the back of the strength of the reserves that have been built by the previous administration, this government has the luxury to decide that I have dollars coming from gold. I won't add it to the gold reserves, or I won't add it to the gross international reserves, but I'm going to inject that into the economy. That is government decision. But mind you, it is important to acknowledge the fact that if upon assumption of office by this government, the previous government had not met the IMF requirement of having to have about 3 months of import cover of our reserves. No matter how much dollars this government could realize from gold, it could still not intervene in the market. So what has created the path for this government to inject in a month less over $500 million is the fact that the previous government took time to build the international reserves to the tune of about $10 billion.
About 8.9.
So government has so much in terms of reserves, so they can decide not to add on to the reserves and push everything into the market to stabilize the city. That is government decision. That is why I'm saying that as to whether going forward, that is what we have to do long term. It's another conversation. But the point ought to be made that if the previous government had not built the reserve, this government was going to be compelled by the IMF not to spend more than $80 million in a month by way of injecting into the economy. But that hurdle has been crossed by December of 2024 by the previous regime. And this government has inherited that. So it has the latitude to inject into the economy.
Because, in fact, as at the end of December, the reserve stood at $8.9 billion US. According to President Mahama, in the last few months that they've been in office, they've added on and currently stands as $10.9 billion. But the argument for a lot of people also is that government is also not spending. If government were to start spending, paying contractors, and living up to expectation in terms of the promises they've made to Ghanaians, the situation may be slightly different.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And not just spending, there is a expenditure misalignment so far as I see. And when Parliament resumes, we're going to ask a lot of questions. Mind you, in the 2025 budget, the finance minister said he was going to allocate something around 200 or 300 and something million dollars for the gold board to buy gold. Today, the amount of gold that this government has bought is close to $3 billion. So the question is, if the government budgeted for, let's say, 300 or maximum $400 million for the fiscal year for gold board, and gold board has spent close to $3 billion, where did that money come from? Did it come from the central government? Did it come from the central bank? We need to know. Other than that, what can simply be construed from this is that government is not spending, and the cedis that we are generating by way of revenue that ought to go into critical expenditures to finance the ministries are rather being used to buy gold in the name of gold board and converting that into dollars and pumping that into the system. The finance minister ought to explain why he budgeted, let's say, $400 million for gold board, and in 4 months, gold board has spent close to $3 billion. Where is the money coming from? And they use cedis to buy the gold, sell it, and get foreign exchange. And so it is not surprising that ministers in this government have started complaining that finance minister is not releasing funds to them. So that huge issue of expenditure misalignment is something that ought to be investigated. We need to understand where gold board is getting the $3 billion that they have used so far to buy gold from. All of us need to ask those questions. But clearly,
you are a member of the finance. You are a member of the finance committee. Even though Parliament is on recess, you don't have the fine details regarding the purchase of gold or the export of it.
Yes, we don't have the fine details. And like you said, it is the responsibility of Parliament to interrogate some of these issues. So we will shut them out. But I am also aware that some RTI, components of RTI have been invoked. Some questions have been, petitions have been submitted to the RTI by some agencies and bodies that I know, seeking to ask the Finance Minister and Bank of Ghana why they budgeted for less than $400 million for gold board, and in 4 or 5 months, gold board has spent close to $3 billion. We need to know where it is coming from. And aside from Parliament, once Parliament resumes, I can bet you we have discussed this. We're also going to ask. The Bank of Ghana is also yet to submit the forest reports to Parliament so that we get to know exactly where this is coming from. And we also need to understand whether or not gold board is trading in the foreign exchange market. Because all these interventions, because the $3 billion worth of gold that has been bought, it is not reflected in the gold reserves because we left, the previous government let the gold reserves of about 30 tons, 30.5 tons. It has gone to just 31 tons. So not even a single ton had been added.
It's a 0.9.
Then also the gross international reserves, the addition to the gross international reserve is far less than how much gold proceeds the government has gotten. So we need to understand that this over 2.5 billion that have been injected into the system through the purchases from gold board through which channel did the government inject them? Did they go through the commercial banks, the central bank, or gold board is actually in the system also trading in foreign exchange, which is a suspicion that some of us have. But this is early days yet. We need to ask all of these questions so that we can fine-tune the whole arrangement. It is a brilliant idea to go for gold for forest. I've heard a lot of talks about gold board, but mind you, let's get it right.
All right.
Gold board is just the vehicle, the principle and the understanding to buy gold in cities, sell it in dollars to get foreign exchange. It's a brilliant idea that was proposed by Bawumia at the time that he said that. They were laughing at him, they criticized him, they said it was not possible, but thankfully, we are grateful that today the government has seen wisdom in those ideas that were espoused by the previous government, particularly the former vice president, to say that we need to back our city with our gold. And that was what was enshrined in the MPP manifesto. And so government is a continuum.
All right.
It is good that this government is continuing, but there are teething questions that have to be asked, like the ones I have raised, so that we all get clarity. Where there are shortfalls, we all provide ideas to see how best we can shape the whole thing. If Ghana succeeds, it succeeds for all of us. So, gold boards is just a vehicle. The idea had been mooted already.
Prof. Lord Mensah, is that a legitimate concern?
Oh, yes. These are things that I do side with Gideon. I mean, he's an insider, more or less, almost an insider. I mean, being a parliamentarian and also being part of the finance committee. But then as a third party or an outsider sitting here, of course, I mean, it is a good policy. I can say that, look, I mean, for a government to run through portfolios of policies, I mean, sieve out the ones that are good and the ones that are bad and be able to continue with the ones that are good or tweak it a bit to continue with it is part of governance. And I would say, yes, that's what we need for the country, Ghana. So from where I sit, the details of it, I mean, as Gideon has espoused, in this communication, clearly, I mean, needs to be, questioned. Of course, in the budget, the minister made clear the availability of funds to Gold Board. But if Gold Board has exceeded, what has been allocated to it, then obviously it calls for questions. And obviously there can be answers to it because, Gold Board being on the market can also have access to funds that may not necessarily come from government. So all these things are things that needs to be put in place to ensure that the country, is on the right footing. But then for us to see an appreciation of, the Ghana cedi, I would say that, yes, indeed, it's a good thing for us. Again, we hope that the internal, real sector, aspect of the economy when it comes to government spending will kick in so that we see, a continuous direction of appreciation of the currency. If possible, see a stability, and that will go a long way to help us.
So it is possible this run will not last forever?
Well, it's not going to run forever because, for every currency, if you look at the technical analysis bit of it, the dynamics, is so sudden and it's so sharp a drop, for a country like Ghana to sustain. But like I told you earlier, we saw an upward surge in the cedi against the dollar, which was a depreciation. We are now seeing, an appreciation. And obviously, these are, trends that if any currency is going to find its stability, will go through. You're going to see an upward swing and downward swing, and over time, we will have, stability. So we are hoping that the real sector of the Ghanaian economy, which has to do with agri sector, which has to do with the mining sector, the manufacturing, will kick in, within the fiscal year, so we can see the true impact of the appreciation that we are witnessing.
Prof, thank you so much, and again, congratulations on your appointment as head of the local government services, Professor Lord Mensah there. You also heard Dr. Gideon Boakon. He's Member of Parliament for Tano North and was technical advisor to Vice President Dr. Mamadou Bawumia during the administration of the MP. And these are very important questions that he wants the finance minister to respond. Why Gold Board was allocated $400 million for the purchase of gold, but has ended up doing over $3 billion United States dollars. These are legitimate questions that he thinks that some clarity must be sought on this particular matter. Let's take a short break here on the pod. When we return, the Senior Staff Association of Public Universities are on an indefinite strike. We'll find out why when we return from this break.
Until the government pays or honors the agreement signed on the 12th of November 2024. Go home!